je m'appelle Karen Gendreau. Aujourd'hui, on fait des arbres salés. There's several ways. I'm sure that people who have made these in the past have different methods, but I'm going to share with you today a method that I grew up learning from my mom. You can make them with chives, you can make them with bunching onions, or echalotes as better known, and I typically use just regular onions that grow in your garden. But since this year was not a best year because of the drought, and my onions did not turn out as well as to be expected. So once you have your onions, plan to do them within an hour or two of having pulled them from your garden. The reason being is that these here will wilt very shortly. The first thing I do once, I have the ones with the onions, is cut the onions off, and oftentimes people will also salt those and eat just the little onions. I have requests for that often. So today we're going to just make the salted onion tails with these chives. The first thing I do with pulling them out of the garden is always trim your edges. These little tips over here, I cut all of that off after I've done my onions. After the onions have been, and then depending on how big you let your onions grow, you can salvage them and use them, let them dry and use them throughout the winter. It is your choice. Once the onions get too big, then you can't really salt them for, eating bite size. Now, after you've trimmed your tips, I always wash them, soak them in the water, and let them in there. Usually I have a much bigger bowl, and I just take what I need as we go along. And here, these are little pieces of grass, which you're going to take out, and, whatever dried pieces that you have. Now today I'm going to share with you that I'm using, as a child growing up or a teenager, I spent many hours sitting under the trees at my mom's yard. Her name was Omarine Doucette. Maybe most of you have bought onions from her. I remember her making them by the gallons. Boardeview was one of her best customers. She would just make 4 to 5 gallons. Today I'm making them in half pints. Can you imagine how many onions it would take to fill up a whole gallon? Next, I lined them all on my cutting board, and I'm going to share with you today that this is the knife my mom actually used when she made hers. She's been gone for 20 years now, so again, I'm sure this knife could tell stories. And then you just cut them about 1/4 to 1/2 inch. You don't want them too big. And like I mentioned before, I usually use the regular onions from your garden, vegetable garden, and what happens with that is that they yield a much bigger product. These here are small. I guess we can make them with any onion tail, even store-bought ones if you wish. It's just that a little goes a long way, where this here it would take much more to fill up whatever you're making. Next, I want to share with you that I use Kosher Salt, which is a heavy salt that does not melt in your jar. Oftentimes when people use them, if they find that they're too salted, they rinse them under water, or you can use them just like that. I've known people to use them in their mashed potatoes. Mostly they're required to use in soups. So I've also brought this bucket that my mom used to store her salt in. If ever you have leftover and you put it in storage, you're always afraid that moisture will make it harden. So this is kind of an air-proof, waterproof bucket that she used and kept her salt, and I just continued that same tradition, that whatever salt I have, I store it in there. But I brought this today so that it's important to know that it's kosher salt, in French, pièce du gros sel. And I believe she used to buy hers in Canada, from what I remember. Then once your chives or your onions is ready, You know, you just put it in here and then you kind of just make sure that it's all covered up. I have a little bit of excess salt here, and the heavier onion tail will also absorb a moisture. You know, they'll create a liquid. Some people choose to put that liquid in their jars, but I don't. I figure that when somebody's paying for a product that I want them to have full use. This salt here doesn't go bad, you know, so even if you have it canned, you don't have to put it in storage, you know what I mean, like refrigerate, or it won't go bad. You can keep it in a cupboard. Oftentimes once you start using it, then, you know, I do put mine in the fridge. And once your onion tails are all covered up, you know, make sure that you have enough. There's no recipe as far as telling you the measurement on salt. You just take it and you, c'est comme mélanger, you know, you just play with your onions until they're all naturally covered, you know, that you can visibly see the salt. Once that's, and usually when I make them with the onions, this bowl would probably be about half full, you know. Like I said, the chives and other in brulette will yield you a much smaller, but I'm sure that, you know, it looks cute in the soup. The girls were just sharing with me earlier that some of them have added celery and carrots to their recipes, and it's all ready to put in their soup. Now, one thing that I do is before sealing them, sometimes I'll cover them with a dishcloth and I'll leave them overnight, because by morning or within a few hours, this it's a French word, ça consomme, you know, your onion will have shrunk, you know, so your jar is not completely full. So if you want it for, you know, storage and you want it to save for later use, you know, then you just kind of tap it down and wait, and then until your jar is next. What I do is and this I have no reason why. I think it's just because I want to protect the salt or the onion product from touching the metal plate of your jar. This is just parchment paper. I've used decorative materials. I've pre-cut some here today just to kind of give it a fancy little decor or a little bit of nostalgia. And in my finished product, you can visibly see the salt, you know, once they're all done. And then I just trim these, and they're good to go. And that's how we make these salé. These are good to use in mashed potatoes, mostly used in soups. Somebody mentioned that they've used it in gravies or patates fricassées, or anywhere that you would use an onion supplement, you know. And like I mentioned earlier, if you find that they're too salty, some people have restrictions on salt, you can use it and just rinse it out before you put it in your food.